Black towns understood self-determination. Those black towns understood collective work and responsibility. Those black towns understood creativity. Those black towns understood purpose. Those black towns understood faith. Those black towns understood the principles of Kwanzaa. We were operating from those principles before Kwanzaa was even a thing. There is a lesson our ancestors are waiting on us to learn. We have to get back to that. If our ancestors could do all of that in the face of Jim and Jane Crow and the KKK of Oklahoma, there is no reason why we can't come together and do that now. Out of those 50-plus black townships and communities today, we only have 13 left. 13. Grayson, who's represented today, and where my mother is from. Tallahassee, Brooksville, Taft, Redbird, Langston, Boley, Clearview, Tatums, Summit, Vernon, and Lima. At this time, I would like for everyone to please stand if you can. In African tradition, we call out the names of our ancestors who have passed on so that they will never truly die. I want to do something a little different. I want to call the names of the black towns that no longer exist today so we will never forget them. When I call out the names of these black towns, please repeat the towns after me. And if you know me, we got to put the fist up. Renty, Lee, Huntingville, Homer, Wiley, Maybell, Sanders, Lincoln, Cimarron City, Bailey, Zion, Emmanuel, Eudora, Douglas, Marshalltown, Norfolk Colored, Canadian Colored, Arkansas Colored, Charlesville, Ferguson, Oberlin, Bluff, Boggy Bend, Macedonia, Melvin, Sweet Home, Louisville, Carson, Gibson Station, and Brushy Creek. Let's get our land back. Reparations now. Welcome to Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, Greenwood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. I didn't realize we were gonna get that this morning. That was truly a history lesson. As often in our offices, we get phone calls about maps and about how many black towns actually exist. And the truth of the matter is we're still finding out because so many of them were erased deliberately. Many of them disappeared because investment was not made in those towns. But as she has said in her welcome this morning, we already had it. We already had it. We were already doing it. And so it's important that we're reminded of that, those cooperative economics. We're reminded of what the early ancestors did with nothing. And they were able to build whole towns like where we stand here in the Greenwood district, where they had a whole main street. Everything they needed was thriving and surviving here. And so thank you so much for giving us that message this morning. We appreciate being here in this sacred space because it is sacred. And so again, our partners today are the Terrence Crutcher Foundation. And so Dr. Crutcher is not here right now, but I'm sure she'll trickle in. I wanted to thank them. I also want to thank our partnership with Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Michelle Batchelor Robinson is director of the Comprehensive Writing Program. And so she is unable to be on screen this morning because she is actually helping to manage the other side of this. And so I wanted to bring welcomes and greetings from her as well as thank Spelman and the Terrence Crutcher Foundation for their co-sponsorship today here in this space. And so what I want to do next is I do want to bring up someone that I think most of you all know. He is a fighter, a leader. He is also a descendant. And what better way to really learn about these places and these spaces than to hear from the voices of descendants, because they represent the legacy of those who came before us, those who built the environments that we stand in, and we are living proof of who our ancestors were. And so what he does is he shares. He is the owner of the Black Towns Tours, and so if you're coming to Tulsa, you want to find Chief Amundsen and make sure that you get the real, authentic version of the story. And so without further ado, I bring up Chief.
So I don't want anybody to think I'm taking their job, but I'm the owner of the Real Black Wall Street Tour. Because I know somebody's doing the Black Towns. I'll try not to move around a lot. I know this is virtual, so I have to be mindful. My name is Chief Amundsen. As our sister said, I want to welcome our friends, family, descendants. A special note of special thanks and welcome to the Mayor of Grayson, who is here in the house. So we give thanks for these true courageous people, and these people who took it upon themselves to say, preservation is everything, right? We need true fighters, people who are selfless, who are willing to maintain, manage, and sacrifice literally everything to sustain something that a whole system was designed to end, right? The sister Vanessa, our counselor, see, I forgot I'm so close to her. Our councilwoman mentioned those Black towns that are no longer with us. But they're here in spirit, because many of us represent some of those Black towns. I'm the descendant of Raymond Beard, Matthew Beard, and Mary Beard, who all three survived the massacre of 1921, who all two built up an establishment in Greenwood, 524 North Greenwood to be exact. My grandfather was 1 year old when the event happened. I'll share a little bit of family history. If you've ever seen the Little Rascals and seen the little black kid with the black top hat, that's my great cousin. That was Matthew's son. And so they had a large number of children. They went to LA after the massacre. My family has roots in Black towns. One happened to be Slick and Clearview. I spent my younger days, I started out working at McDonald's as a teenager, and I thought, this is trash, right? Like, I can't make any money here. So my cousins who were pro bull riders said, come on down to Clearview. Practice in Turley, though. And you can ride a bull for a few seconds and make more than you made at McDonald's in a week. So I put my life on the line a few times until I saw my cousin get hit in the head with a horn, and I said, I think I'm going to pass on this. But there's some strong history in those towns. And my roots are Grimes and Lowe's, the Lowe family in Clearview. I'm not a historian. I'm a history recovery specialist, which is very different from a historian. And that title is significant to me because Napoleon Bonaparte said it best. History is a set of lies agreed upon. That means many historians are liars. Let me show respect to those historians who taught us something, right? Because we're talking about his story, not our story. But we got historians who told our story. All right, so I just wanted to be very clear about what I'm saying here, to not be disrespectful. In the spirit of my children's fourth great grandfather, I appreciate the honor to speak before you. My children's fourth great grandfather was named King Blue. He was out of Chickasaw. He was a Chickasaw freedman out of Stonewall. And 140 years ago today, he sent an appeal to the House of Representatives to talk about the mistreatment of the freedmen, those Africans who had been freed by those tribes, and the mistreatment and the unwillingness to give them land allotments and to make them citizens. And they were very robust. He was very robust and very eloquent in his appeal to the House of Representatives. And he said, we've been landless. We've been nationless for over 40 years. We underestimate the value of these black towns and these representatives in these black towns and the people who support those black towns. I see supporters here from Tallahassee. You know, we really need to edify and uplift these people who spend a lot of energy and time trying to make things happen without applause, without recognition, without notice. And there are some of these people in this space who make that contribution. So I want you to really think about who these people are when you visit these towns. And because, I just had a big bike rally here, and they visited a lot of those towns. And I encourage people to not just visit like it's a zoo, but to figure out ways to invest in these places of history, right? Because that's really what's needed. I'm not going to give you a big lecture about Greenwood or Black Wall Street, because most of you know a lot of that history. What I will do is I'll expose you to some of the lies about Greenwood. I'll expose you to some of the marginalization about Greenwood. And you notice I use Greenwood instead of Black Wall Street. One of the reasons I don't use Black Wall Street a lot is because in doing tours, what I figured out is a lot of people tend to think linear when you say street. They think that people just drove down one street and killed and bombed people. We're talking about a whole district, right? You could walk the length of 40 blocks. So that's very significant when you think about land space, right? Because land equals what? Power. And that's what the word is. That's what the mantra should be for these black towns. Land equals power, right? We have to acquire land. We have to keep land. We have to maintain land. We have to sustain land. You know, when I bought my home, I put my land on a separate deed from my house. In the event that I ever lost my house, I'd still have the land because I understand how the system works, right? But we got to keep land. Let's talk about Greenwood for a moment. Let's talk about some of the notions that have been presented to you about Black Wall Street, whether it came from a historian, whether it came from a journal, whether it came from wherever you got your information from, or a documentary. Let's talk about it for a second. Number one, let's talk about let's talk about Oklahoma. Why is Oklahoma significant? Everybody always asks that particular question, like, hey, there were riots and massacres all across the country. Yes, there were. But why is Oklahoma significant? Well, let's ask Edwin McCabe, 1892. He went to the United States government and said, listen, this place can qualify as an all-black state. The first all-black state in the Union. Most people will never knew this history, right? It's new to many who are hearing it today. Don't trust my word, look it up. Right? Because everybody's using Google nowadays. Look up Edwin McCabe. Look up Oklahoma black statehood. Because the whole state almost became an all-black state. What really pushed that or gave that momentum was the fact that you had all of these black towns in this state, pre-Jim Crow. Right? So some of the rhetoric amongst a lot of historians is Greenwood and educators, Greenwood developed as a result of Jim Crow because they were forced to spend their money with each other. Let me tell you what's problematic about that narrative. Number one, you're using the word force. We had 27 black towns before Jim Crow was even thought of. Were we forced to do that? Or was that that we were willing to spend with each other? We wanted to spend with each other. We wasn't trying to be forced to be neighbors with people we knew hated us. We were saying, give us 160 acres, give me 80 acres, give me 40 acres, give me one, and I'll show you what I can do with it. Where'd the wealth come from? Agriculture, livestock, and oil. All three categories. We don't talk about those heroes. We don't talk about those people who built economic wealth because the robbers came in and not just stole the land and the resources, but also stole the history, right? So you were written out of history. so nobody could ever know. Critical race theory is not new. It is not new. Otherwise, we would have known about Black Wall Street, AKA Black Wall Street, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago. It wouldn't still be a new thing. The other thing is we have people who try to marginalize. They say we romanticize Greenwood. Now hear me well. There are people who say we romanticize Greenwood. There were not that many wealthy people in Greenwood. See, this is when you don't have cultural literacy. You make ridiculous statements like that. Let me explain what I mean. If you have a household that has 2, 3, 4 families living in it, you have acquired some wealth. Follow me. Think about it. If most of you had 3 family incomes in your current home, you're going to acquire some wealth. You're going to figure out how to capitalize on that. That's called cooperative economics. Greenwood was not built on capitalism. It was built on cooperative economics. And that's why you had so many wealthy people in Greenwood, wealthy families, people. The idea of I am because we are because I am, that was a constant. That was a part of our psyche. So the idea that if you come up, I come up too, right? If you have an establishment, we have an establishment. If you have growth, we have growth. If you have a black town, we have a black town. So we can say, you got people who ain't never been to a black town, who live in Oklahoma, who will say, we got black towns, right? Because the idea of ownership and pride and dignity is a very valuable mechanism, right? And so those are the things that we really look into. The other thing was, the last thing I want to share with you before we make this an interactive discussion is, because I want to empower you. I don't want you to just hear what I have to say today, walk away and not feel empowered. I want you to have clapback status, right? Seriously. Where we're going with this is what I want to say to you. I want to ask you a question. Why was Greenwood destroyed? And if you're virtual, you can put your answer in the chat box. But why was Greenwood destroyed? Please, just power. Okay, what kind of power? Envy, political, economic, social, land. All right.
Fear.
Jealousy, fear, all of those things, right? But there are 2 very prominent means or apparatuses that were used, and one was land. The other one is the one we still deal with today. What's the one source of power collectively black people do not have? Can anybody answer that question? What's the most oppressed system, right? How are we oppressed the most? It's a source of power. It's been said. Political. Let me help you understand. Because you got to know what happens before the massacre to understand how we got there, right? And most of us used white journalistic outlets to get our information from. We were using the Tulsa World, the Tulsa Tribune, the Democrat. We wasn't using black newspapers. You don't see, when you Google Black Wall Street or Tulsa Massacre, you always see Tulsa World, you always see Tulsa Tribune, but you never see any of the black newspapers. What was happening pre-1921? In 1920, 2 major things happened. A white man named Roy Belton was released from the jail and handed over to the Klan, or the mob as they called it. It's literally written in the document that shows where they signed out Roy Belton, this white man who had killed a taxi driver. They released him to the Klan out of the courtroom, and they lynched this guy, or out of the jailhouse. They lynched him. And the police directed traffic for women and children to get there safely, like a day at the movies. That same year, there was heightened sensitivity about what could happen to us. Like, we needed to really defend our community. And we needed to understand what was happening in the mindset of white Tulsans in the oil capital of the world. So let me let you in on a little secret. In 1920, March to be exact, A.J. Smitherman, the owner of the Tulsa Star, one of the greatest newspapers to ever exist, black-owned newspapers in the United States, devised a plan and said, listen, to all my Republican brothers, they didn't invite not one delegate to the National Convention, not one black delegate. And you're giving over all your power, all your vote, right? Where I'm taking you into the psychology of how we viewed politics. We didn't have party bias. Our bias was based on what can you do for us, right? You don't get our vote unless you do for us. That was the idea. That's the attitude. So what happens is A.J. Smitherman, some other business proprietors in the district, and other community members, and they figure out, hey, I got an idea. A.J. Smitherman said, the election is 30 days from now. The Democrats run everything. Even the Klan is they're the ones creating policy and different procedures or ordinances that violate rights, that oppress us. What if we took over the Democratic Party? What if we hijacked it? This is a citywide election they're talking about. These people in 30 days converted from Republican to Democrat. In April, when the election occurred, because then you had a ticket vote. It wasn't like an individualized vote. That you voted for a whole entire ticket. These people in 30 days hijacked the party of the Klan. Follow me, listen to me well. When the election happened, how many votes do you think they lost in a citywide election? 205 votes. They reclaimed their political power in 30 days. They only lost the ticket by 205 votes in a citywide election. Do you understand the threat level that has just been elevated in that moment? You're talking about people who would now control politically the oil capital of the world. Y'all are not listening to me. Listen, do you understand what I just said? Politically, these people saw true power in that moment. Like, whoa, if we could do that in 30 days, imagine what the next election would look like. And we got our own money, so we can lobby who we want. We can pay for whoever we want. We can do what everybody else does, right? We're not those poor folks who just can't figure out how we're going to get such and such an office. We can say, no, here's a check. This is our expectation. Because we had the wealth to do what we wanted to do. Collectively, we used our unified effort to almost take over a city, right? And empower ourselves. Everything the Republican Party was telling us to do, we simply just took the principles and applied it to another process, right? Because we're saying we can do it over here, we can do it over there. It's about how can we activate this power. Now, what you have to understand is what happens after that. The media spin. We have to criminalize Greenwood. There's prostitution, there's gambling, there's bootlegging. It's a cesspool for crime. All you have to do is read the articles that follow the election. And all of the articles to create public sentiment about Greenwood, so when we do burn it, nobody will feel sorry. You will say it is a cesspool that needed to be burned. And we're going to take the land because we desire it. 5 days after the massacre, an entity is created called the Tulsa Real Estate Exchange, along with an entire plan to take an entire district. What's sinister about that? Let me tell you what's sinister about it. After the bombing of Greenwood, martial law was declared. That's what's sinister. That means every municipal office should have been closed, and there should have been no ability to create any kind of organization unless it was already created. And you just simply needed an excuse or something to ignite the fire to end it all. So what you have is ethnic cleansing, you have a Holocaust, you have genocide, you have a massacre. It's every category. If you look up the definition of those words, they all fit. You have a population of 10,000 people. The Red Cross says we have 6,000 people in our custody. That means you have 4,000 people you cannot account for. Let's say 1,000 escaped like my family did. That still leaves you 3,000 people that you cannot account for. Let's say another 1,000 was able to hide out in the creek, Mohawk Park. All of the places that were listed where people actually hid out. That still leaves you 2,000 bodies you cannot account for. So what follows that? Where'd the bodies go? You have people who want to tell our story, who don't believe that people would have dumped all those bodies in the Arkansas River. Now, these historians need to really read history. 1918, the mayor said, stop dumping horses and cows in the Arkansas River. It is unsanitary. So to dump people in the body that you hate would be nothing. Furthermore, you got black and white witnesses saying, we saw truckloads of bodies dumped in Arkansas River. You got black towns who are saying, come get these bodies out of this river that we get our water from. On top of that, we had heavy rains June 2nd, 1921. On top of that, the Arkansas River flooded 1921. On top of that, Tulsa, Oklahoma got 14 inches of rain in June of 1921. It's all the science, right? We just got to be scientific in how we deliver our information, that's why I'm a history recovery specialist. We got to recover the truth so we can tell our own story from our own lens, from our own perspective, because you cannot empathize with people if you don't know what's been taken, what's been lost, what's been stolen. It's easy to marginalize somebody's story. It's easy to say, well, black towns don't matter. What's so important about black towns? Let me tell you what's so important about black towns. People went from grass to grace. People went from being inhumane, treated inhumanely, to rediscovering their humanity. People basically destroyed every stereotype that could ever exist, that had ever been placed on black people. We shattered every stereotype, and we were uninterrupted in the process. Despite political opposition, despite oppressive ways of people who created a vigilante organization called the KKK. Despite the Dawes Act and the effects that it had on freed people. Everybody celebrate Juneteenth. We can't celebrate Juneteenth in Oklahoma in 1865 because most of us wasn't freed till 1866 by the tribes. So imagine leaving Texas looking for your people in Oklahoma, and you come here and we still picking cotton in Hugo, Oklahoma. And you thinking, wait a minute, what are y'all sharecropping? No, we enslaved by the tribes. We have a very special history here. And to not edify it, to not honor it, to not celebrate it, to not give it its due justice is an injustice. So thank you for listening. I hope I've given you a lot of information that you probably didn't know. If you want more information like that, you can go to our library at the Center for Public Secrets, and we will dig in even further. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you. And so at this point, I think, there's so much that has been said. A lot of heavy information that some of us didn't even know. I never heard of the Center for Secrets. And I think that anybody who's coming should visit the Center for Secrets because it tells the real root of why this all happened. And so I want to thank Chief for sharing this morning. I know he has a whole lot more that he did not say, um, because it's a lot. But some key points I just want to mention that he said in another way. The only way to change the narrative is to change the narrator. That's it. You've got to change the narrator. And the only way to change the narrator is we got to know our history. We got to know where our people came from so that we can start to tell the truth. It ain't critical race theory. Tell the truth about who we are and what our ancestors did. And so when you come to Tulsa, make sure you get in touch with him so that he can give you the full story as a descendant of those survivors here in this place. And so what I want to do right now, because we do have an online audience, I do want to give a shout out to Queen Mother Wakila. She is in Kansas, and she wants to make sure we give a shout out to Nicodemus. That is a black town in Kansas, all right? Also, want to give a shout out to former Mayor Darrell Johnson, who is from Mound Bayou, Mississippi. Mound Bayou, it is the jewel of the Delta. And lastly, I want to give a shout out to Mayor Alberta McCory, who hails from Hobson City, Alabama, the first black incorporated town in Alabama. Most people hear Tuskegee, but it's Tuskegee Institute that was really black, because the statue is still there. The Confederate statue of those who started that town is there, but it's Tuskegee Institute where Booker T. Washington established that college, and the town of Tuskegee Institute grew up around it. And as was all the students and the professors. And so I want to give a shout out to them this morning. Also, I want to let you know before we lose some of you, is that on June 2nd, which is next Saturday, we will host another Black Roundtable in Eatonville, Florida. It will be hybrid again, and the lessons that we're learning today, we'll try to make sure we rectify them before next week. So we want you to join us. You can go to blacktownsroundtable.org. You can register for the next roundtable. We will have representatives from the National Park Service, because one of the things that we are working on is creating a trail, a national trail of historic black towns and settlements across the nation. And so we've already written up the legislation. We already have many sponsors across every state. And what we will be doing then is finalizing our plans. And so you don't want to miss this. If you know other leaders in black towns who need to be tuned in and logged into that meeting, this will be the inaugural meeting that will be that will finalize and culminate in Prairie View, Texas in November, where we will all sign and hand it over to our legislators to bring it into law. And so I want to let you guys know about that on June the 2nd. blacktownsroundtable.org. Our next speaker, we're going to go virtual. Her name is Dr. Assata Richards. Dr. Assata Richards is full of fire. And she's full of fire because, just like Chief said, all of our power is within us. This woman embodies real fire for her community, real fire for making sure that from the ground up, that they will be the drivers of the future. Not just what happened in the past, but the future. And what she's doing in her community of Third Ward, where 8 formerly enslaved people started Emancipation Park, which we'll be celebrating 150 years. What she's doing is she's taking her own community and the people in that community and creating cooperative economics, where her own people pull themselves up economically. And so without further ado, Dr. Assata Richards.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me, Ms. Tanya? Can you see me? I just want to thank you for the opportunity to really be in the community with you. I'm so honored to even be in the presence of, the Black Mecca for Black community, which Tulsa has been for so many of us. And I have the pleasure and honor of spending many years of my childhood in a free colony in East Texas. And so I know the importance of community, and I have benefited and had the foundation of being in a community that was self sufficient, but most important, that was a social safety net and a source of protection and nurturing for me. And in my bio, I list this community, which people always, it's called County Line. People always, look and say of all the things that I acknowledge that that community gave me really my compass and my really sense of self that has guided me throughout my life. And so I'm coming to talk to you about community, a Black community wealth building. And am very grateful for the councilwoman and her words, and the historian or the cultural keeper and his words, which really align to this work. And I'm going to sprinkle a little history in here just to remind us again, as everyone has said, what we're talking about doing is what we have already done and what we have always done, which should give us encouragement. But really honing in on a strategy for how we build upon that history to a new and a defined future for ourselves. And so I'm going to be talking about community wealth building. And so, the reason why I do this is because my love and devotion for Black people, right? And the absolute brilliance, beauty, resilience, determination, and pure joy, warmth, tenderness. As we all sure our hearts are heavy over what happened in Buffalo, New York, a place that I visited and went and learned and sat at the feet of those residents in this work that I'm trying to do, which is about preserving, protecting, and revitalizing Black communities. But I was very struck by the son of one of the individuals that was murdered by white terrorism and brutality, right? When he said, we try to do the right thing. We do the right thing. We are good people. We work hard, right? And the reminder that despite who we are, that white supremacy and white terrorism find us where we are, right? And so I just want to acknowledge always that at the source of this work is really our love for our people and the beauty that others don't see, that we recognize and we know to be our birthright. And so, in honor of so many beautiful Black people all over this country who are dependent on us to get this right and to make a solid foundation for their futures. And so, in thinking about this work, a quote that really struck me came from Nonprofit Quarterly, right? Of all people, right? That really has taken a bold stand on what is happening and how we move this work forward. So, Nonprofit Quarterly wrote that the COVID-19 pandemic has upended our world. It has laid bare the inequity, the limits, and the failures of capitalism. The door to a better future beyond capitalism, already cracked open by the Great Recession, has been pushed open a little wider. Things that seemed impossible a few months ago now seem both possible and necessary. This historic moment calls us to push hard through that door to build a world that centers people and planet. To do so, we need to be clear about what we're trying to leave behind, to have greater clarity about what it is that we are moving forward post capitalism and a solidarity economy. And so I'm going to be talking about this solidarity economy. And so I just want to say that, sometimes when I talk about building Black community wealth, people are shocked, at the audacity of that notion. But I want to say we do have allies, right? We do have people that understand that this current system is not working for Black people and it's not working for people in general, right? Because it's not working for them, right? And so they are receptive to our audacity to come up with new paradigms. And so this really motivates me, a very traditional, organization are looking to us, and our history of Black cooperation and Black community wealth building, something that's a challenge to capitalism, which is really about exploitation. And we know, as people of African descent, we have been at the center of this capitalist system, right? And so the reason why we challenge capitalism is because this system of capitalism in the United States was built on our backs and at our expense and at our very lives. And so it is important that we critique it and we look at it not as a friend of us, because it can never be a friend in the context it was built, at our expense and for our exploitation. And so, what are these issues, right? You know, nonprofit quarterly say it has laid bare the inequities that we are facing. And so, I'm not going to say anything that we don't know, but it's always important that we center ourselves on the conditions that we're trying to solve, right? And so we understand that African Americans at every level, right, are suffering, and are the last, the least, and the forgotten in many ways, right? And so when we look at home ownership, which we have been told is the basis of wealth building in this country, and we know the history of, redlining and the GI Bill and all the ways in which we were restricted by the federal government and taking part in these systems, that we still suffer, right? And so African American home ownership still lags behind. And as Tanya said, I live in Houston, and I'm from Houston, Texas. And the Urban Institute came to Houston to study home inequity, right? And they only came to Houston because it had a large Latino population, right? But when they got there, they realized that it wasn't Latinos who were suffering the most and had the most inequity. It was Black homeowners and residents, right? And they were so surprised, right? That, Black people are doing worse than Latino, right? And so we weren't surprised. But again, the least, the last, and I say in places where we have an emerging uh, Latino population, we have begun to be forgotten, right? By nonprofits, by other entities, because our issues have remained, and everybody has surpassed us in terms of equity. And that is an important notation for us to remember. Despite, and it's not because we haven't done the work, it's despite our efforts, we still suffer inequalities. Wealth inequality, right? Because home ownership for African Americans is the source of wealth building, right? And so if you don't have access to that, then equity is certain to come. And so we know that in terms of wealth building, right, that African Americans, lag significantly behind others, right? And so again, even if we go to college, if we get the good job, we're not able to take that and create any wealth for ourselves in terms of home ownership or in terms of assets, in terms of businesses, right? And then we suffer, and of course our children suffer, and of course our community suffers. And then just again highlighting medium net worth, right? And we see over time, right? Over time, it's almost remained flat, right? Other people have had ups and downs, right? But we've had very few ups, right? And so it has really remained flat for us. And again, this is across time and different administrations. So what these strategies that we're employing are not working for us as a community. And household, um, household, head of household, right? So again, that, you know, even the individuals in the model of marriage and, in the model of building family, that we are not able to really earn, the resources necessary to move our families, right? Not just ourselves, but move our families forward. Um, and this is just to bring home the fact that these inequalities, they last across our lifetime, right? So for others, the starving poor college student, right? The starving millennial or young adult, right? But that's okay because, once I hit my 30s, you once I hit my 40s and I get that PhD, right? Life is going to be good for me. That doesn't happen for Black people, right? So across our time, across as we age, the gap gets greater. And now we find for African American women particularly, they've reached the ends of their lives or the last phase of their lives, their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they cannot afford to provide for themselves. So we have a very critical situation that's emerging for our Black community. And in terms of our assets, what we own, right? So again, it's not that we're not trying these strategies, which other people know about. It's not that we're not trying for stocks and mutual funds, educational accounts, equities in our homes. That again, these strategies fail us, right? And they don't do sufficient enough to improve our lives substantially to close the inequity gaps that we have inherited from a history of exploitation and deprivation. And so business ownership, right? Because when we talk about Tulsa and we talk about um, Black communities, historic Black communities, one of the things we talk about is the strong business ownership, right? That's what we talk about, right? And so I just want to give you and remind us a snapshot of where we are in terms of, business ownership and building the Black, economic really system in our neighborhoods, right? So we know that small businesses are part of a thriving economy. And if our communities are going to thrive, then the business infrastructure has to be there. But it's not there for African Americans. And so our ability to rebuild and maintain our community are very much threatened because our share of business ownership is so small, right? And so this is the great disparity, right? That we don't even have the business representation that represents our share in the population. So we are roughly 12.9, 13% of the population, and we only have 3.5 of the small business. And we see whites own more than their share, right? And we can say they own more of their share because they've taken what was rightfully ours, right? So again, this inequity exists at all phases of wealth building. And so, just let's summarize the situation in terms of small business ownership, which is what, I'm really talking about here in terms of community wealth building. Black Americans own approximately 2.2% of the 6 million businesses with employees, right? So we may own a business, but the business is not at the scale, viability, and sustainability where we can employ anybody, right? And that's power. Power is not when you tell somebody to go and apply down the street, right? I think they're hiring at the local Piggly Wiggly, right? Power is being able to say, we are hiring over here, right? We have people that are exiting the criminal justice system. We have jobs for you. Come down here and apply to our businesses, right? So again, our businesses may exist, but unfortunately, they do not employ individuals. Only 2% have employees beyond just the founder. And only 57% of African American businesses report their business is profitable, right? So many people are not even benefiting from the 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 wealth of the business, right? The business is not even sustaining them and sustaining their family. And then when we look at the revenue, right, that we see that the receipts, right, what what businesses are bringing in, there's great disparity that right in there. And then of course, um, or we hear a lot about black women, um, and what they're doing, and how they are really just, they're leaving black men behind. That's a misnomer, right? Because black women businesses and firms are still underperforming, right? And again, not because we're not brilliant, not because we didn't get the degrees, not because we didn't have families that taught us how to run business and save money, because we live in an equitable system. And so, 100 years ago, because we've been talking a lot about history, right? 100 years ago, right? This is what was said about the black economist when he was thinking about where we are. These were the barriers, right? Difficulty in obtaining capital and credit still exists. Number one reason why people say black business owners say that they cannot create their businesses or sustain their business. Low wages, right? That's why you see people fighting for unions, Amazon and Starbucks, right? Mob violence. We saw mob violence. We see the continual intimidation of black people. Occupational restrictions, right? We see those are very much, ban the box. The fact that people who have criminal records cannot, obtain certain jobs. Prohibition against owning certain types of property. Denial of the right to sue. Restrictions against settlement in the West, and civic and educational hardship. So these were the things 100 years ago that were identified. And so I will say that these are the things that persist, right? That we still have not overcome those, despite we have overcome, we have not overcome, and the system has not dramatically changed. And so, what is the answer? And I am proposing, and it's not a new concept, so I know many of you have heard of this concept before, that many of us have focused on, I included, individual asset building, right? I go to college, I go to the great college, I get the great job, I buy the house, I invest, I save for my retirement, right? That the ideal of individual wealth building would not create the substantial change we need in our communities, right? Individual wealth building strategies are not enough because the system does not focus on us as individuals. The system focuses on us as a category known as black people, right? The system focuses on us as a population, and the system focuses on us, systemic and structural racism, as a community, right? And so if we are dealing with systems and strategies against us that are structural and that are systemic, then we've got to operate at a level that allows us to get close to winning, right? And I know this is why you're part of, the association and the alliance of black communities, right? Because you know that, right? And so I just want to say that our strategies have got to really map themselves on top of the way in which we understand, our assets. And community wealth building does that, right? Because so many people will come into our communities, and so many people, will talk about things they want to do for individuals, right? And individuals are our ultimate goal of benefiting, but the way we operate must be systemic and not on an individual level. And so community wealth building is community development through creating economic prosperity by democratizing wealth and ownership, right? And it's really by saying, I love what the brother said, I belong to this family. This is my family, right? Because he is associating himself with his wealth, which is his family group, right? And the history of that group, right? And in that same way, that's what we need to do is to make wealth building a collective enterprise, right? Not that we build, we build ourselves up individually, but we build and work on wealth building and ownership in a group sense because we know that there's protection in numbers, right? That we are safer, we're more resilient when we're not on our own and by ourselves. And so, what does that mean in a very specific sense? It means promote broader ownership of capital, right? Moving beyond, individual ownership of assets. Anchor jobs locally, right? Jobs that are locally embedded in our communities, right? Stop the leakage of dollars from communities. We know this, right? Make the dollars turn. But the question, how do we do that, right? We can say things like we need to buy from each other. But what does that mean? How do I know how to buy from another person? How does that happen, right? Support individual and family asset wealth building. So again, it's not that we don't support individuals, but we support individuals in the context of neighborhood, right? Reinforce stewardship, right? So that means the long way in which we steward our communities. We're very good, great stewards of churches, right? How do we create long-term stewardship? Funders often like this idea of dropping some money down. We're going to give you this one-time gift, right? We know that doesn't work, right? We don't put our hands on something and then, that's our moment. We go on to the next thing. How do we stay involved and invested over the long term? Generate revenues to finance public services, right? The things we need collectively, right? So oftentimes we live in suburbs of places where we get our individual needs met, right? But how do we make sure that all the trash gets picked up? How do we make sure that all the children get early education, right? How do we make sure that all the high school seniors go to college, right? Or go to work training? How do we guarantee that everybody has access to affordable housing, right? And then we need to enhance local economic stability. So I don't think we would differ with any of these things. In many ways, we need to leverage our anchor institutions for the community benefit. And so I want to say that this work comes from the Democracy Collaborative, right? That have been doing work about how do we support communities, right? And so they have this concept of community building, which is something that wealth building, which is something our Black communities have already done, right? And so again, we're not looking to someone to give us an answer that we don't have. This is our history, this is our legacy. The question is, how do we return to it, update it, and use appropriate strategies for our particular context? And so I'm proposing that community wealth building connects people, right? So again, about doing work that centers people, right? The idea, how do we build relationships? Because I want to just take a moment to say that we have to take serious consideration to the amount of trauma that Black people have historically experienced and continue to experience, right? So, knowing what happened in Buffalo, knowing that we're celebrating, the anniversary or acknowledging the murder of George Floyd, right? Breonna Taylor, right? That those traumas impact us in the long run, right? And that the work we're doing is really reparative. It's the work of repairing the damage that has been done and that continues to be done to Black people, right? So we're not just talking about, fixing a building or, brick and mortar. We're talking about the work of healing Black people from the trauma that they experience daily at the hands of white supremacy, right? And so connecting people, because it is in the touch and in the connection with us, with one another, that is a balm against the pain and the sorrow and the mourning that we go through, right? So I'm talking about a strategy that's not just about the number and census, but that's about the soul of our people, our hearts, our bodies, and our minds. So connecting people, creating opportunities, right? Again, the power is not in me saying to somebody, I know so and so is hiring, right? And I have no ability to, control that hiring process. It's creating the opportunities that my people need, right? Miss Sonia said that in my introduction. The power is that we don't have to be beholden to anybody. And we don't have to come with our heads bowed and our hands, folded asking anybody for anything. What we need, we should and can provide for one another and ourselves. You know, and after I finish this, I'm gonna go visit, some sisters in a supportive housing community, and I'm so happy to visit them because they're employed, right? They're employed by jobs that were created by our community, right? And it's Friday and payday, and that sense of joy that I'm going to feel when I see them because I know they have money in their pockets to provide for themselves today because we were part of creating those opportunities for them, right? So that's the power of creating and being in community and building community wealth, right? Because I by myself will be okay. I got a PhD. Trust me, I'm going to be fine, right? But how do we build something that goes beyond our individual accomplishments so that our people can have the same sense of accomplishment that we have, right? So through communal asset creation, acquisition, development, solving local problems, addressing inequality, promoting democracy, building a sense of community. So when we build businesses, we're thinking about all of these things. We're not just thinking about, the revenue and the expenses. We're thinking about businesses that do all of these things. Is it a business that solves a problem? Do we address inequality? Do we promote democracy? Do we get people involved so that they can be engaged in their community? And do we give people a sense of ownership of the place that we community, right? And we do this to build the quality of life of our community members. And so I just want to say, we often talk about Black Wall Street. And the reason why we talk about Black Wall Street is because Booker T. Washington nicknamed it, the Negro Wall Street. And I know I'm imagining when he did that, he was talking about, just the prosperity part. Because if anybody's been to Wall Street, we know what happens on Wall Street, we don't want to duplicate, right? Donald Trump came from Wall Street, right? We don't want to duplicate. Wall Street has nothing to teach us, right? Because Wall Street is not the place of equity, connection, community building, right? And so, but I just want to take this quote from Miss Samuels that said, when thinking about Tulsa, right, the noted accomplishment nearly absent from the urban life today were business inception loans, right? Farm source grocery store, a superior education system, America's largest Black-owned luxury hotel, a community hospital, 2 newspapers, and an economy that thrived during the Great Depression. But most importantly, she identified community wealth building strategies that fueled the economic mecca, social interdependence, community reinvestment, and land ownership, right? So again, pulling out the pieces that contribute to really and holistic and a well-being of our community, right? And that's what we're talking about here. Community wealth building strategies among, not just talking about the next billionaire or a person that's able to give philanthropic dollars to do this or that, right? That's not community wealth building. Our community doesn't want to be beholden to anybody, white or black. We want to have the ability to do for ourselves. And that's what we learned from the Mecca known as Tulsa and other Meccas, right? And so W. Du Bois, again, looking to history to move us forward. W. Du Bois cautioned us, right? At the turn of the century, the 19th century, he said, we unwittingly stand at the crossroad. Should we go the way of capitalism and try to become individually rich as capitalists? Or should we go the way of cooperatives and economic cooperation where we and our whole community can be rich together? And I just want to say, this is what we're working on. We're trying to go the way in which we can be wealthy together. And wealthy together doesn't mean that all of us are going to be millionaires or billionaires, right? But it means that our needs are taken care of and we have a quality of life that we deserve. And so I just want to say what Du Bois worked on created a great foundation for us to remember that the ideas of community wealth building is within our grasp. So they were able to create 154 cooperative owned businesses. And many of the things that we see as successes in in our black communities were cooperative businesses, right? So producer cooperatives, transportation cooperatives, distribution and consumer cooperatives, real estate and credit cooperatives, right? So these were businesses that created community wealth building and that did not just create wealthy black Americans, right? We love to celebrate the Jay-Z's and the Beyoncé's and the Rihanna's, right? Those are individuals, right? The question is not can we individually be wealthy because we know we can. But the question is, can we create wealth for our community? And so just to give you a history, a lineage of really the accomplishments of this, right? So the Knights of Labor, which was nationwide, they promoted cooperative stores, warehouses, collective lending, and worker cooperatives. And the Knights of Labor were integrated within the union for whites, right? But this union was allied and allowed African Americans to use the union to fight for justice. And I want to really connect that point, right? Because we often disconnect, I remember Bob Johnson said, this is not a social experiment, this is an economic, project, right? When he talked about his wealth building. But we know as black people, we got to use our economics to create a political strategy, right, for ourselves. Because money alone won't protect us, right? And so we've got to build in political power. And cooperatives have been used to build political power. The Color Farmers National Alliance of Cooperative Union, right? This had a membership of 1.2 million in 1891, right? That black farmers came together. They worked together. They met each other's needs, right? They supported one another, right? And were able to sustain and survive under racial terrorism. The NC Mutual, right? Where members pool their monthly fees and dollars together to provide stipends for widows, right? For black women who were left alone when their husbands were lynched and killed and murdered and died, right? They created a stipend, right? Before there was any federal government, because we understood our job was to take care of one another, right? They also used this monthly fees to bury loved ones because they wanted the people and the members of the community to be able to have dignity at the end of their lives. They created insurance, right? So again, we see the power of community wealth building. The Young Negroes Cooperative League. This is really important because these young people really became the seeds and the foundation for social justice, right? And so they created 24 consumer cooperatives across the country and buying clubs, right? Where they pull their resources together to bring down the cost and the expense of things, right? The freedom of quilting bee, right? This was a staple of the civil rights movement. These women came together and began to create opportunities for one another, right? Because they wanted to be involved in the civil rights movement. And what they noticed is that when they spoke up, right, then they would be dismissed, right, as maids and nannies and other servants of white people, right? So they wanted to make sure that they could stand up for themselves and still feed their families. So they brought themselves together and did quilting, right? And sold those quilts all over the country so that they would have the ability and use their money for themselves, but then begin to fund the civil rights movement. So I just want to say, and we know Fannie Lou Hamer. We know the great Fannie Lou Hamer, who was beaten and brutalized, right? And when she came back from standing up for the right to vote, the sharecropper owner said, you and your family got to go. And she said, and it's not a moment too soon, and I'll never stay someplace that will demand me be silent in the face of injustice just to eat, right? And so she created a kid cooperative so that she can stay involved in the movement. So again, it's important for us to understand what we're talking about doing, we've already done. And so what is this thing? What is this thing I'm talking about? I'm talking about a business, right? But I'm talking about a different business model, right? I'm talking about a business that's set up to meet the needs of individuals in their communities. So from the purpose, the business is to meet the needs of the individuals in my community, right? And we are in connection to what those needs are. So we create a business that allow us to meet those needs. It's a business that's owned, right, by the individuals who either work in the business or who consume the products of the business, right? So grocery store. The grocery store is owned by the people who shop there, right? How many times do we say, I don't know why they don't have any more fresh vegetables in here? Why they got all this liquor? Why they got all this processed food, right? So when you have a cooperative grocery store, it's not why don't we, right? And if we desire healthier foods, then we have the power because there is no business without us, right? There is no grocery store without the customer, right? And so the customer is the owner of that business. The person that's caring for our loved ones as CNA workers or providers are the owners of that business. They create a better business because the business meets their needs, right? And because it's run and operated by the member owners, right? So for Black people, this is critically important because I would argue the greatest trauma we experience is in the hands of the labor market, right? How we are treated, dismissed, oppressed, discriminated against, brutalized, exploited. I will always remind us that Clarence Thomas showed us who he was and how he had treated Anita Hill, right? But we, because of our trauma, ignored the trauma she experienced in the workplace because for Black people, that's just how it's been, right? We've always had somebody to mistreat us and bully us. And I say that time gave us what we have. And if we would have seen that as totally unacceptable, right? Then we would have known that Clarence Thomas was totally unacceptable, right? So again, creating businesses that are holistic, healing, and reparative to our circumstances. So just want to double down on this. These are people-centered enterprises, controlled and run by and for the members to realize their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations. That's why the quilting, bee wasn't just about making quilts to make these women rich, right? It was about being able to support the civil rights movement, right? It was about being able to support the community, right? Because again, as Black people, we know we have to do those things. It brings people together in a democratic way. And I want to say, the reason why we always have to remind each other, right? Like we got to work together. We got to support one another. We got to do this. We have to remind each other of this because doing that is so foreign to how we exist in this country. And we often we're so hard on Black people about, we really, got to have more unity and we are not unified. And we don't even take into consideration that since the day we were born in this place, it's taught us to compete against one another and to compete against ourselves, right? And so working together and being cooperative is hard when you don't know any other way, when you are constantly told that it's about competition. And I got to do for me and I got to do for my family, right? Because if I don't, who's going to look out for me, right? And so cooperatives give our people a chance to be re-educated, to be re-socialized on a more empathetic and compassionate way of being, right? That counters the type of violence and terrorism in which they have learned. And we're driven by principles and values. So important, right? We are in this country because they were driven by profit and not principles and values, right? And so we can never duplicate the worst of our oppressors, right? We must elevate ourselves, and cooperatives allow us to do that. And then the most important thing, it allows the people to take control of their economic future because they are not owned by shareholders. the economic and social benefits of their activities stay in the community where they are established, right? So the people who work hard on these businesses get the benefit of that business, right? They get the benefit. And for people who came here as property and ownership, this is a huge transformative way. And I say we cannot build our communities back if we don't do this deep transformation that's necessary in the psyche of Black people and how we exist in this country. So, how do we build wealth? What is it? What happens? In a very clear way, that carpenters provide quality goods and services to areas that have been excluded, right? Again, if we need a grocery store, we create a grocery store. If we need childcare, we create childcare, right? We build the businesses that we need. So often we're always asking other people, like, well, why don't we have this? Or why don't we have a Starbucks? Or why don't we have a Chick-fil-A, right? Why y'all don't bring that to our neighborhood? We don't ask other people to do for us what we know we can do for ourselves. And it allows us to invest in the local companies, right? In the communities, right? We have 2 cooperative businesses, and those cooperative businesses have bank accounts at the Black Bank, right? Do you see how that works, right? And we work with each other, right? We support one another. And when we have any resources that we can use, we use them with one another because we have the ability to use our capital in that way. And our cooperatives are local, right? So it circulates within the community, right? We're here. That's why we use the bank in our neighborhood, right? And so we don't have to ask people to circulate their money. We create a system that allows them to circulate their money, right? And it builds social networks, right? We build relationships. Anybody that start a business know that you really build a relationship within that business. And it's not just our cooperative members, work together. They have relationships together, right? When their children need anything, when they have death in the family. We had several people who lost loved ones under COVID. We were there. We were at the funeral when we could. We were making sure that, dollars were given for the funeral expenses. We were there for them when they needed someone because we want them to be there when we need them in our business, right? So we build that strong community, not just after work, right? Because we work at 8 and 10 hours on these jobs, it's hard to come and be with your community, right? You can do it, but we're with our community each and every day because we're working together. And then, if purchasing cooperatives help you make things more feasible, right? More economic. We know this. This is nothing we don't know, right? That's why you get the toilet paper together, right? When you go to Costco and you divide it up in the family, right? So again, these are not things that we don't know. These are things we just need to see as strategies for wealth building. And then particularly worker cooperatives create quality empowering jobs. I got started in this because I got tired of Black people not getting the opportunities they need, right? You got a record, you've been to prison, you had a hard time, you have a child that has a disability, you can only work part-time. All of that is reasons for us to work with our community members, right? So we open doors that other people close because we see the intrinsic value and beauty in our people. And we don't ever give up on our people, right? I'm going to just say we had this young brother that had, gotten out of jail and he worked for our construction company. We have a construction cooperative. And this young brother was a great, but he had to come early, like at 7 o'clock, and he had to leave at like 2 o'clock. He had to come at 7 o'clock because he had, to report to his probation officer, right? And then he had to leave at 2 o'clock because he had a car that overheated on the freeway, right? So he needed to leave before, it got too hot. But that he was a dependable worker. He got himself so situated and so stabilized that now he has his own business and we contract with him on jobs, right? So he moved from being an employee of ours to being a partner on projects, and we celebrated him. And the greatest thing of all, he was the son of one of our cooperative members, right? And she was able to get him a job in the business that she was a co-owner in, and he was able to use that opportunity to create new opportunities for others. That's the power of being able to create for our community. And so I just want to say, it's just a system, right? It's a system and a traditional business, and we're not against traditional businesses. We just say that we need a diversity of offerings, right? What traditional business been a few people wealthy. We're looking for businesses that make groups of people stable and wealthy as well, right? In terms of assets, right? So it's a different business model than which we're accustomed to. And what kind of cooperatives? They run the gamut. A cooperative is a business model. So you can have all types, right? A agricultural cooperative, arts and crafts cooperative, a business cooperative, a child care, credit union, custodial businesses. Lord knows we've done a lot of cleaning up. Food cooperatives and buying clubs. And cooperatives, utility cooperatives, worker cooperatives. Cooperatives is a business model, and you can use the business model to create and solve all kinds of problems and create all kinds of opportunities. And I just want to say, the joy of this is making this work accessible to people, right? Because, we all didn't come from a family where we inherited such a great history of opportunities and achievements. That's not everybody's story, right? You know, including mine, right? My family did amazing things, but we also lived in the projects for part of our historical trajectory, right? We lived in poverty, right? Because that's the story of Black people despite our, actions. So a lot of people go socialized thinking that they can never own their own business. They can never do anything more than what they're doing. They're told you're always going to work for someone else. Couples brought an opportunity to get outside of that, working together, pooling our resources together. We are so much stronger than we are individually, right? That it creates a pathway to new opportunities. And that's what we're really offering through the cooperative business model. And I just want to say this exists all over the country. I'm not talking about something that people have not been working on. I owe no credit to so much of what is represented. We just had a convening in Baltimore, and this is where people came from across the country to represent Black corporations. It is happening all over the country. We're building a national association of Black cooperators, right? So we can share resources, learning, share funds, share opportunities, right? So this is happening across the country, and it's happening across the globe, right? Cooperatives exist on the continent and have been really the sources of equity and opportunity. And so I thank you for this opportunity, and I employ us to be bold in our thinking, right? To be bold in our thinking, to return to our history, to move forward, and to be creative in our application of that history to create a better future for not only ourselves and our children, for our countless numbers of brothers and sisters who are depending on us to do this right and to be successful in our efforts to build Black community wealth. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Asada Richards. As you can see, she has doctor in the front of her name. Um, she's not just talking about what we should do. What she is doing is she is living proof that this works. And she has adopted the principles of the ancestors to rebuild wealth in the community, as she has said. She has some clear, concrete examples of how to do that. And so now, thank you, Dr. Richards. We had a couple of comments that came in the chat, and so people were really intrigued by the model. People wanted to know more about the model, and so we'll share that information and make sure that you can log in and get in touch with Dr. Richards about her model, and maybe she can come to your town. I will say that when she talked about how we work together, the thing to me that strikes me most is that growing up in Houston, Texas, going to church in a community called Independence Heights, nobody ever told me that that was a Black town. It wasn't until I was 40 that I learned that this was a Black town and we had 3 African American mayors. And then I started to remember all the businesses that used to be along the main strip. And what my pastor would say to me is that everything we needed was right there in that community. We never had to really leave the community. And so when we talk about cooperative economics, Black towns were built on that. Mound Bayou had its own bank and its own hospital. All the loans that they needed for a house and a car, they got it from right there at the bank in Mound Bayou. And in order to kill Mound Bayou, they pulled the charter of the bank. And so we have to remember that as people of color, Black people in Black spaces, that it's our unity and cooperating together that really is a strategy to building wealth in our communities. As we get ready for our last presenter.
And Tanya, I just want to say I put my email information on the screen just for this 1 second. And thank you, and please reach out to me. I'm committed to doing this work to the best of my ability and do anything I can to support anybody, but to connect you to resources that I know to support you in your efforts in your communities. Thank you, Ms. Tanya.
Thank you, Dr. Richards. One thing that I do want to share is that when we did, in our community, we did 8 communities in Houston, they did a market study. And it was a market study that didn't use traditional sources. And what they did was they went to our communities and they looked at how much money was leaking from our communities. Because like she said, we're spending money. And so what they did was they gave us a snapshot of what was leaking. And I can only speak for my community. There was $172 million leaking from our community. And the largest chunk of that $172 million was in retail. And when you break the retail down, it was groceries, clothing, food, and pharmaceuticals. And so when we got that study, and this, I'm speaking to leaders because this is a roundtable, this is a discussion. We took that document, and when she talked about reinvesting in our communities, when you need a cleaners, when you don't have a coffee shop, that study gave me all the numbers I needed in order to go out and shop and attract that kind of business into my community, to rebuild that community. Now today, we have 3 pharmacies in our community. So we are recapturing that amount of money that was leaving because of pharmaceuticals. We're an aging community, so you got a lot of people on medicines. We have groceries. They pulled up a Whole Foods in our community, and we said, wait a minute. And when we told them who we were, they said, well, how can we be good neighbors? And what we ended up sharing with them about being good neighbors is that you're in a Black community. The products that you sell need to reflect the community that you're in. And what he ended up doing was saying, we're going to hire from your community. And not only did they hire from our community, they literally asked our community to give them products that they could sell in their stores. And so now when you walk into a Whole Foods, an H-E-B, you're going to find Jive Juice. That started in my town in Independence Heights. You're going to find Soul Fit Grill in every one of those stores now. So we can plant seeds that take root. And so what she talked about was building us as individuals, building from within. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our last speaker, and she's an attorney with Lone Star Legal Aid. And we all know that our communities are plagued with environmental injustices. In Houston, we're fighting a freeway that's getting ready to take out 31 homes and 3 apartment complexes. And we know what freeways have done in the past. We're also fighting waste dump sites in a community called Carbondale. They are going to go from 3 feet high to a 12-story building in garbage in their community. In Waller County, we're fighting cemetery erasure. We don't want it to be a parking lot. We don't want it to be, like Chief said, somewhere that just gets washed away because of a value. And so Lone Star Legal Aid has really been a champion in helping our communities push back and fight back against these types of injustices that are happening. Did I mention to say that they're free? And they have a national office. And so if you haven't, and if you know communities that are dealing with this, if your community is dealing with these types of injustices, you definitely want to tap into Lone Star Legal Aid. And so I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Attorney Ashia Jones. And Ashia is a little bitty something, but she is truly a fighter too. And the information that she's going to share is about how we're losing our land. Because we can't rebuild businesses, we can't bring back Black Wall Street if we don't own nothing in our communities. And so over the past few years during the pandemic, in my community of Independence Heights in Texas, we saw aggressively our land disappearing. And I was wondering how that happened. I would go to bed and wake up and there's 20 new townhomes down one street. And so when we started looking into it, we realized that if multiple people own land, buy one out, you can force the rest to a sale. And so what she's going to talk about is that's happening, but she's also going to talk about strategies that legally they're using to help combat Black land loss in these spaces. And so if Ashia is ready, we can bring her on.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Bose. I appreciate you for inviting us today to speak at this great gathering and conference. And I also just continue to welcome any opportunity that we have to assist the Independence Heights community. So the presentation that we're going to present on today is about the work that we have done in Independence Heights and the work that we continue to do in Independence Heights community in the Houston, Texas area, and even within our rural and urban counterparts that we serve. So again, my name is Attorney Ashia Jones Brown, and I come to you from Lone Star Legal Aid in Houston, Texas. Before I get started, I do want to let you know that there is a disclaimer. This information that I'm providing today is for informational purposes only, provided by Lone Star Legal Aid. We do not warrant that this information is for any other purpose. The presentation shall not constitute legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship. The laws referenced in this presentation may have changed or could be affected by case law developments. Do not rely on this presentation or your interpretation of same for any purpose. If you have a legal question, you should consult with your properly licensed lawyer. And because this is a group that includes a lot of individuals from around the country, we're going to present to you about inherited property and the tools that we're using based on the laws and forms that we have within the state of Texas. So again, I hail from Lone Star Legal Aid. We are a nonprofit legal services provider. We represent and serve 76 counties. 72 of those counties are located within the state of Texas. 4 of them are located in the state of Arkansas. We're the 3rd largest free legal services provider in the U.S. We cover about 1/3 of the state of Texas, and that is about 60,000 square miles within our state. Our goal is to protect and advance the civil legal rights of the millions of Texans living in poverty. What we have discovered is that it's best to represent individuals in both our urban communities as well as rural communities, and we tailor our representation based off the needs of the communities that we serve. So we provide community education like what you're receiving today, as well as legal representation to give our clientele equal access to justice. I am a staff attorney with the Equitable Development Initiative at Lone Star Legal Aid. As I stated before, we provide free legal services. It's based on an intake process that considers the household income as well as assets of the individuals who are asking for our services. So if you hear anything in this presentation and you're within our service areas, feel free to give us a call and let us know your legal issue. And if we're able to assist, we definitely will. A lot of the issues that we currently are facing right now in our communities definitely is evictions with landlord and tenant issues related to the COVID pandemic and the staggering effects of that. We also deal with a lot of consumer issues. We don't represent anyone with criminal issues, but definitely consumer issues related to Social Security, consumer debt relief, family violence issues. We also represent veterans and a lot of their interests. So if you have a legal issue and you're not sure if we can help, give us a call. And at the minimum, we'll provide you some advice regarding your legal issue if you qualify. So the unit that I am a member of, we focus on three main legal areas: environmental justice, fair housing, and community advocacy. The goal of our unit is the goal of our unit and project is to seek to create safe, healthy, and affordable communities where people have the opportunity to thrive. So a lot of the issues that we tackle are related to systemic issues in communities of poverty, communities of color. It could be related to infrastructure, disaster, inequality. It could also be related to environmental justice issues, the issues that Independence Heights is currently facing, that Tanya discussed briefly before. We also challenge injustices in fair housing. A lot of our work is focused on the entire community, not individuals themselves, but what injustices have entire communities been facing. Which brings me why we're presenting today: inherited property and also the increasing or decreasing Black wealth in African American communities throughout the United States. One thing that we've seen is Black land ownership has definitely impacted the severe racial wealth gap that is currently decreasing at a rapid rate in the United States. What we have seen over the last 100 years is a significant decrease in home ownership. And that directly impacts the wealth of an African American or persons of color in their household. So our thoughts are that we definitely agree with this quote: why sit back and watch more and more property and land and homes go, and then on the back end call for reparations, as opposed to trying to stabilize home ownership so that it's not dissipated 20 or 30 years from now. The racial wealth gap or divide is a staggering. Our household wealth. Other races have a $65,000 household wealth, whereas white household wealth is currently at $171,000. What we're seeing in white households is that white households continue to increase in wealth every year and every decade. But what we're seeing in Black households and communities of color is that the average wealth in communities of color or households of color, though the average wealth keeps decreasing. What we have seen as a serious reason for that decrease in wealth is because Black homes are not being properly transferred from generation to generation. Typically in the US, the way to the American dream is first home ownership, and then transferring that home ownership to the next generation so they can take advantage of either living in that home or selling the home and receiving the proceeds from the home. So it therefore increases the wealth of generations to come. But that has not happened. So what we're facing now is trying to assist individuals who qualify for our services with their air property issues. So what do you say, or what do we say air property is? Air property is any property that has been inherited as your primary residence, or any other property for that matter. You've inherited this property by will, transfer on death deed in Texas, or intestacy. And I'll remind you again that a lot of the terms that we use are going to be unique to Texas, but hopefully this will spark some thoughts in your head about some tools that you can use that are already current in your state, or tools that you can try to advocate for on your own behalf to have in your state. So intestacy is when a homeowner dies and does not leave a will. What we've also seen in our Texas area is that a lot of individuals in communities of color and Black communities are not taking advantage of estate planning. Even if you only have a home, that is your most expensive asset, and it's important to prepare for your family in the future for estate planning. In Texas, you can do that by using a will, or we also have a new form, a fairly newer form. It's called a transformed death deed. That is an easier way and sometimes less costlier way of transferring your property or your home to your loved ones. So what is intestacy? Intestacy is a legal process that governs who inherits a home. In Texas, when a homeowner dies without a will, the legal title to the deceased person's home passes by intestacy. So that means your relatives, depending on who's alive, will inherit according to Texas law. Though individuals that you desire to inherit your home, you won't have a say in it. The Texas law will govern who inherits your home. So it will, your individuals who are either your children, your siblings, your spouse, or other relatives will inherit your home according to the manner and percentage that the law states that they will inherit. If you die and intestacy laws apply, your family must go to, in most situations, must go to probate court, which is very costly to do for families and communities of color or in households that have limited income, limited access and understanding about the probate law and code. So it's very important to start thinking about these things. And why is estate planning important to the entire community? It's important to your entire community because transferring wealth, also you're transferring community. You're transferring or preserving your community as you know it. Independence Heights is a historic community in the heart of Houston, one of the largest cities in the nation. And you would imagine how important that community is. They're very close knit. They care for each other. When they have disasters, which we're known for in Houston, they go and make sure that they have water, that they have access to food, that they receive the assistance that they're entitled to receive. But if we're not preserving our communities and transferring that wealth, that sense of community that's intangible, that cannot be purchased or bought, it kind of dwindles down and is not preserved. So that is why it is important individually in your home to prepare for estate planning. And that's also why we should preserve inherited property in our community, because there are a lot of stories and rich history in these communities as well that are tied to our buildings and tied to the relations and the connections that we have together. So at Lone Star Legal Aid, there are 4 tools that we are using to assist communities like Independence Heights with preserving their inherited property. One tool that the state of Texas has is an affidavit of heirship. Another tool is consolidating ownership for individuals who want to have a less divided or a smaller percentage divided amongst different owners, and a homestead exemption form that lowers taxes for heir property owners, and also a transformed death deed, which is an easier way to transfer your property before you pass. And we'll talk about those tools today. So the affidavit of ownership, what is that? An affidavit of ownership is a simple form that Texas created to assist individuals who have heir property to avoid going to a more costlier process of probate, or going to hire an attorney and going through that more costlier, lengthier process of transferring ownership. So when is an affidavit of ownership, an affidavit of heirship used? When a homeowner dies and leaves behind property. An affidavit of heirship can be used to transfer their property to their heirs at law. It cannot be used if you have a will. So it's important to know that if your loved one did have a will, you will have to follow through with the probate process if that will was not probated within a certain period of time in Texas. Where do you file an affidavit of heirship? You simply file that affidavit of heirship once it's completed and notarized properly, and we'll talk about that in a few seconds. You file that with your local county clerk. So it's less costly of hiring an attorney, going through probate court. Once the form is completed and properly executed, you file that form with the state of Texas, with your county clerk's office, and it typically is about $10 or so. It varies based off where you file it, so you just have to pay the filing fees. And once you do that, all of the heirs that are entitled to inherit according to intestacy laws in Texas will be listed as the rightful owners. Now, I will say there is a caveat here. An affidavit of heirship can be challenged by other heirs who claim they're entitled to inherit. It can be challenged within the first 4 to 5 years that it is filed. But if it's not challenged within that period, it will be perceived as true and accurate for all purposes of maintaining and selling property or just property ownership in general. So I have an example here for how this affidavit of heirship example works in Texas. And one reason that we're bringing it up is because the Independence Heights community and other historic communities have the opportunity in Texas to take advantage of this. But in addition, this is a tool that you can take back to your home area and home state and to speak with representatives that represent you on the state level to communicate how the state of Texas is benefiting or helping individuals with heir property and how your state too can use this tool. So an affidavit of heirship in Texas works in this manner. So Betty and Robert, they were married, lived in Independence Heights for this example. Robert died before his wife Betty. When Robert died, he had a will, it was probated, and everything was transferred to Betty. Betty, his wife, is now deceased, but she did not have a will drafted before she died. So it left their children, sister, brother, and Cheryl as owners of their property, and they inherited by the state intestacy laws. Cheryl is the only child that lives in the home. Sister says she doesn't know what to do. Brother says she doesn't know what to do. Cheryl lives in the home. She wants clear title because she knows it's important not to leave title to property in a deceased person's name or within the estate of a deceased person's name. This is an example of the affidavit of heirship that we would use to assist this family in clearing title to their heir property. It's an affidavit of heirship. You're required to include the names of heirs, which in this example are the siblings, the date of the birth of the siblings or children or heirs that are entitled to inherit, their death, if applicable, the addresses of each heir, as well as the deceased person's name or the owners of the property's name. In this case, it would be Betty Jackson. She's the only deceased person in this scenario that died without a will. But it's important to include her spouse information as well so that it is clear, it will be on record, the history of the ownership and the history of this family. It is also required to have two persons who knew of the deceased party, who was very familiar with the family history or the property ownership history of this community or of this asset, which typically is someone within the community, someone that this family had a relationship with at church or at work or a neighbor. If for some instance, they're not an unrelated person who's available to notarize and witness this document, we always recommend going to someone who is disinterested. So someone like a cousin who does not have any rights to inherit the property. So in our example, after we use the affidavit of heirship and execute it properly, notarize it properly, and have the requisite witnesses sign and attest to all the information provided, the title to the property is now cleared. Sister, brother, and Cheryl are each 33% undivided, have 33% undivided share ownership. And as long as no one challenges this affidavit of heirship within 5 years, it will be presumed as true. Even during that 5-year period, all the siblings could still choose to sell the property or take out a loan or something. It's definitely an acceptable document by title companies, by mortgage companies, if these individuals wanted to do something with the property. The next tool that we are using in communities like Independence Heights is a transfer of ownership. We have a lot of communities and community owners in our footprint where there are a lot of siblings. There may be 10 siblings or 10 grandchildren that inherit. And a lot of times that we see, there are individuals who don't have an interest in maintaining an ownership in the property. They don't want to live in the property, and they may want to transfer their ownership to their to someone else that they are related to that also inherited the property. So in our situation, sister says mom and dad would want Cheryl to have the house. Brother says he wants Cheryl to have the house. They want to transfer each their 33% share to their sister. So what we would do in that situation, if the inherited person say that they want to transfer their ownership, we would simply draft a deed for this family or for these siblings, and they would, each individual would transfer their ownership to Cheryl in this example, and then Cheryl would then own 100% of the home. And this is important in communities because it's, again, sometimes more costly to hire an attorney to do that for them. In communities of color, individuals cannot afford to hire an attorney or real estate attorney to do this for them. So if they qualify for our services, this is something that we would do in addition to drafting an affidavit of heirship. And again, the goal is to make sure that property is preserved in communities, especially communities of color, as well as making sure you preserve those communities. By making sure that we have consolidated ownership when individuals want to consolidate that ownership, and making sure that individuals can clear title to property, that is going to preserve the nature of our communities. That's going to make sure that we maintain and increase Black wealth in communities of color going forward. Another tool that we're using is helping our clients take advantage of homestead tax exemptions. I know some states do not have homestead tax exemptions, but thankfully in Texas, we do. In the past, heir owners could not take advantage of 100% of the tax exemption. Only the individuals who were residing in the home could take advantage of their apportioned share of the tax exemption. However, this all changed in 2019 under Senate Bill 1943. So if you're in Texas, please listen up now. This is going to apply to you and could be very helpful and beneficial to people in your communities. So under this new law that's taken effect, instead of Cheryl being able to take advantage, if she did not have consolidated ownership, instead of her being able to take advantage of only just a 33% homestead tax exemption, now under this new law, she can qualify for 100% of homestead tax exemption. And so you may be asking, why is this important? This is very important because another aspect that we've seen in our communities is that individuals are losing their heir property because they cannot afford property taxes. The community that we've assisted, Independence Heights, what they've seen is a lot of outside investment, a lot of gentrification. And so you'll have heir property in the community that is next to a new build or next to a townhome, and their inherited property value continues to increase. But while your property value increases, you're also having a significant increase of property taxes. And so now with this new bill, in our example, Cheryl was able to benefit from a decreased property tax obligation because she's the owner of heir property. I will also show you this, and I apologize for the blurred, it's kind of blurry of my of this picture, but I'm going to show you the staggering amount of estate-owned single-family residential properties in Harris County. So if you look along this picture, the orange dots represent Hispanic or Latino communities. The blue dots represent predominantly white communities, whereas you have the green dots representing Black and African American communities. The black dots represent each estate-owned single-family residential property or heir property that did not, at the time of this, when this was created in 2020, they did not take advantage of homestead tax exemption. So what that tells us is a lot of the estate property is concentrated in communities of color, especially Black communities. Also, what we also see is that, and for each dot represented here that's concentrated in Black, Latin communities and other communities of color, they're having to pay higher tax bills. And typically what's happening when there's a state-owned property, no one may live there, or you may have an older person who has more of a fixed income or lower income that cannot afford to pay those high tax homestead tax bills without taking advantage of that homestead tax exemption. And so what ends up happening in these communities is that these estate or heir property owned properties are the heirs end up losing the property to tax sales because they cannot afford to pay taxes. And the reason they can't afford to pay the taxes is because they have not been able to take care of that homestead, take advantage of homestead tax exemption. Again, as I stated before, the contrast with white neighborhoods with higher, without those higher taxes, because there are not a lot of air property within that area. And this map is also from the city of Houston or Harris County area. So it's a very urban area. But what we've also seen in our rural areas is that there's a lot of air property related to farming and more rural property as well that are concentrated by individuals who have air property in communities of color in the rural areas as well. So again, Senate Bill 1943 was passed in 2019. To learn more about this, how the Texas legislature designed and passed this important legislation, we recommend you looking at one of the bill sponsors, the University of Texas Law School. Heather Way is a professor and a director at the University of Texas, and she did a lot of work to lobby and push this legislation. The Lone Star Legal Aid, we're not involved in lobbying or pushing or legislation at all, but we do encourage you to look up that information to see how Texas was able to pass this bill for individuals to be able to take advantage of the homestead tax exemption as heirs. So again, a little bit more about the homestead tax exemption and why it's important in Texas. Without a homestead tax exemption, you may have one house that has to pay about $1,875 a year for a property tax bill, whereas if you have a homestead tax exemption, it's lowered to about $1,189. But that really is important because you can see the difference in the monthly obligation. One obligation without the exemption is $156. Another example is $99. So this is a picture of a neighborhood in Houston. As you can see, this could definitely identify or compare into the Independence Heights community, where they have new townhomes that are being built every day. You have this newer property that increases that air property that we're giving you an example of to the left. However, increased property value in Texas also means an increased property tax obligation. So a lot of individuals come to us and say, now that our neighborhood is nice, like this picture shows here, why do I have to move? And a lot of the reasons that residents have been forced out in communities like Independence Heights is because they cannot afford those high property tax bills as a result of gentrification or development in their community. And as I said before, they haven't been able to really take advantage of the homestead tax exemption. So what happens to the value of the home when property investors come in and build nicer homes? And for the example that we have taken is, in 2018, the home value of the historic home in the neighborhood, it was valued at $74,000 for tax purposes. But as you can see, that increase of the property value to this year has been valued at $193,000. So for property ownership, that's great. However, if you're not taking advantage of this exemption, it's going to significantly hurt you. And I will show you the difference in property tax obligation. So in 2018, that obligation with a homestead tax exemption was only $1,189. If you continue to maintain the exemption, your property taxes only increased about $600. However, if you're not taking advantage of the exemption as an air property owner, your taxes have gone from $1,875 to $4,686. And that makes a huge difference for individuals with a fixed income or individuals that lack the adequate income to take care of this increased property tax bill. So what does a homestead tax exemption do? It lowers your taxes, as well as it decreases your tax costs every year. If you're in Texas, or if you're an individual that wants to see the forms that are used to take advantage of this homestead tax exemption, you can find it here at the comptroller website in Texas, so you can take advantage of it yourself, or you can also look to see how you can kind of modify this or take this tool and try to advance or propose this tool within your home state. So the result here, if Cheryl owned a 33% share of the homestead and she applied for the homestead tax exemption, she would then qualify for 100% exemption. The last tool that we are using in the Independence Heights community to preserve and maintain air property is the transfer on death deed. The transfer on death deed is a very unique form to Texas. It is a form that is used as a simple way to transfer real estate to someone else after you die. It is a form that has to be recorded before you die. It's a form that does not give anyone rights to your property before you die. It's a form that can be rescinded at any time before your death, but upon the date and time of your death, if you have properly executed that transfer on death deed, your property is automatically transferred to the individuals that are listed on your transfer on death deed that's on file with your county clerk. If you don't have a will or a transfer on death deed related to your real estate, your heirs are required to go through probate in the state of Texas unless they take advantage of an affidavit of heirship form that we talked about earlier. Again, probate can be lengthy and expensive with attorney's fees and court costs paid from your estate. A lot of individuals are not savvy or educated enough to represent themselves in probate court. And so it's important to think through how your property will be transferred upon your death, because you work your entire life to maintain this. It's important for your community. And the effects of it also ripples out to your community as well when there are a lot of air property concentrated within your community. So how is a transfer on death deed different? It's different because you avoid probate. You decide in advance who should inherit your real property interest. Again, this does not give anyone control over your property before you die. They cannot dictate what you do with your property. You could still sell it if you choose to sell it to others. You could maintain it. You can take out mortgages on it, take out liens or loans on it, but it's just an easier way to transfer your wealth that is preserved in your home or real estate. So in our example, Cheryl is now owner of the property she inherited from her parents. She's 100% owner. She's now deceased. She has 2 children, 2 sons. She drafted a transfer on death deed. We drafted it for her. She qualified for our services. We included her son as both her sons as owners of the property. So the property was automatically transferred to her 2 sons without having to go through the more costly process of probate. Again, we would say, if this qualifies for you within the state of Texas, please consult a tax expert to learn about tax obligations when you're using a transfer on death deed. It's likely the individuals who inherit by a transfer on death deed will not be able to take advantage of the estate inheritance tax laws and decreased tax obligations. But I will say it's important for your communities to weigh out the chance of having air property that is not properly probated versus having property that is easily transferred in a less costly way, and they have clear owners, clear title. It's important to think about that. And one reason that we've come up with these 4 legal tools that I will also mention is because we've come up with these tools because there are a lot of disasters that we have in our state and in our Gulf Coast area. Independence Heights is no stranger to that. They've been impacted by floods. They were impacted by Hurricane Harvey. And a lot of times in our state, when you are impacted by disasters, FEMA or state agencies like the General Land Office or even the SBA are impacted by not having clear title because they have not been able to take advantage of disaster assistance. And even with the longer disaster assistance that we've seen in the state of Texas, individuals are not able to take advantage of having their home rebuilt or repaired because the applicants on the applications to receive assistance, they are required to show that they are the rightful owners. They've had challenges showing that they are rightful owners when they have air property or there's a deceased person who lives in the property. You also have to show in these programs that you have the right to, that you are actually residing in the home. So showing that you actually reside in the home is also a challenge in these processes as well. And so that is why we have come up with these 4 legal tools that we're providing for in the Independence Heights community. We're educating individuals like we're doing today about the different tools that are available to clear title. And what we have also done is make sure that people know these rights before they die or before they transition, so they can take advantage of that transfer on death deed and be more proactive about transferring that property as well. So again, my name is Ashia Jones Brown. I'm a community advocacy attorney with Lone Star Legal Aid. I have my contact information here for anyone that has questions about this within the state of Texas or just in general, to just pass on this information to you in your state as an educational purpose as well. So I'll open the floor up for questions if there are any questions that you may have, and I'll stop sharing my screen for the moment.
All right, so we're checking the chat, Dr. Robinson, if there's any comments.
And I hope you all can hear me. I see that there are issues with the sound, and so I really apologize for that if there were issues with sound.
Any questions here in the room? Okay, go ahead. Do you have to have a transfer on debt deed and what you've specified in the will?
So if you have, just in general, if there is a transfer on death deed for real estate, there is no need to include that piece of real estate in your will. You could note it in your will, hypothetically, to say that this property has been transferred by a transfer on death deed and include that information in your will, but it's not necessary to do so because you've already prepared and plan to transfer that piece of real estate via the transfer on death deed option.
All right, thank you. One other question. If you already have a homestead, does that automatically transfer to the person who's listed in the transfer?
No, if you have a homestead tax exemption, and once the transfer on death deed is active upon your transition, the new owners would then have to file a new homestead tax exemption. But once it's filed, there's no need to continue to file it every year. And that homestead tax exemption is also filed with your local appraisal district. I did not mention that earlier. So it's something you file with your local appraisal district, but the form can be found with your appraisal district, and it can also be found at the state's comptroller's office.
Is there an age restriction for the homestead exemption to transfer?
Okay, I'm not sure, but I'll answer the question that I think she's asking. For the homestead tax exemption, there's not an age limit or age requirement. Now, within most counties in Texas, there is additional exemptions that will likely be available to you once you become 65 and older. However, those exemptions don't transfer from owner to owner. They're unique to the individual owner.
Okay, we have one in the chat. The question is, are there forms online where this could be filled out? And do you know how much it might cost someone to do this? Do you have any general idea?
So I believe TexasLawHelp.org or TexasLegalHelp.org. If you Google that website, it's a free website provided through a lot of the legal aids in Texas have collaborated, or free legal service providers collaborate on that website. And these forms are available there for you to look. They also provide free information to anyone that views that site on how to process these forms yourself as a self-help option. And you can look at that if you're outside of the state. You can look at those self-help options to try to take these forms back to your state and lobby for yourself or advocate for your communities to have them so you can take advantage of these in your home areas. And I saw another comment in the chat about do we work in Oklahoma? Again, the only states that our legal aid offices are in Texas, in 72 counties in Texas, and then we also serve 4 counties in Arkansas, near the Texarkana area.
All right, I think we have come to the end of our questions for, hold on, we have one more, Ashia here.
Can you also specify in either the affidavit of heirship or the transfer of dead deed that you do not want the property sold once it is transferred? It can only be passed down.
Could you hear her?
I did not. I
Okay.
did not.
She said, can you also write it into the transfer of death deed that you don't want to sell the property? That the property can never be sold. That's a good question. I want to know that one too.
No, unfortunately, and I know that's a big thing in our communities of color and our African American communities, to make sure that the home asset is transferred in generation to generation. So that is not something that can be included within the transfer on death deed. If you want to include a clause regarding what the current heirs and being can do with the property during their lifetime, a will is required to do that. And in Texas, that will has to be probated within 4 years so that that restriction will be maintained. If your heirs don't probate it within that 4-year period, they will then not be, that clause will not restrict your property, if that makes any sense.
Miss A, I just want to jump in and say, there is the option to be able to put properties in community land trusts. That's what community land trust exists for, right? And your children can still live there. They can live there. Their children can live there. But community land trust is that community ownership piece. Because I think leaving it to individuals who fall on hard times, who marry somebody who you did not give birth to. You know what I'm saying? There are a lot of contingencies when you put a individual over properties that need to be utilized for the community. I think we should also look at community land trusts as options because people are moving to that.
Thank you, Dr. Richards, for that addition. I believe that's a great tool to take advantage of as well to preserve our communities. And the transfer on death deed can be used if you did desire to transfer your property to a community land trust. The transfer on death deed is still a tool that you can take advantage of to do that.
Set up these types of land trusts. And so we'll do that at a later time. And so I think we are clear with questions and comments in the chat. I believe we are clear in this room because it's lunchtime. And so Ashia, Asada, Chief Amuson, Councilwoman Hall Harper, Tiffany, Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, Dr. Michelle Robinson with Spelman. We want to thank all of our sponsors, all of the people who have made this possible today. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, they have put their information into the chat. We will also post it onto the blacktownsroundtable.org. I also want to make sure that I send a shout out to some of the people that are texting me. I want to send a shout out to Anita Jackson. She is a councilwoman in Hobson City, Alabama, and so she wanted me to let everybody know she's listening. Sending a shout out to our team in Prairie View. They actually have some students that are on listening, and so there are a lot of people with this hybrid. We are able to reach people in a lot of places. We also got a shout out from the National Policy Alliance in Canada, where they were also on listening. And so this information is going a long way. This is not something that's published in the paper. And so please take it back to your community. Make sure your families know. When I learned this information, I went to my family. I said, grandmother passed that land down, but that don't mean we own it. And so now we know how people are using this. And so I thank Ashia. I thank all all of them this morning for sharing with us. And so we are going to be completing our whole weekend here in Tulsa, in the Greenwood District, celebrating and commemorating the 101st anniversary of Tulsa. And so we're going to be joining the Black Wall Street Legacy Fest. We'll be back next year. Remember, guys, next week, we will be in Eatonville, Florida for Zora Fest. You can go to zorafestival.org, learn more about all the things that are happening there. We're going to be talking about cultural heritage tourism. And so I want to make sure that you all know, just follow us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Black Towns Roundtable, as well as hbtsa.org. And so without that, with nothing else more than hungry stomachs, we're going to end this, and I want to thank you all for joining in our roundtable today. Thank you.
Record.